Welcome to Relax and Chat, episode 40. Today, from Tallahassee, Florida, we have SS Fitzgerald. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, Rod. Thank you so much for inviting me out.
Oh, such a pleasure to have you. I see you on Twitter all the time, and I see your neat books. My schedule and my TBR do not mix, but, they are definitely on there. They're definitely something I want to read. And because of that, I'd love to let the audience know about your books. This gentleman has done something. Now, I'm a publisher, an editor, a writer. I've done a little bit of everything, and I know the time and effort that it takes to write a novel. That's not no little easy thing you pop out in 2 days. And in about roughly, what, 3.5 years, you've published four novels. That's
Yeah,
a lot of work. That is a lot of work. This is a dedicated writer. And I'm so impressed. And so I would like to ask if you would just take a moment, tell us about each of your books, the title and a little description, so that the audience can, know what to look for. I'll certainly put links down in the description to all of your books. Um, but, verbally, if you can say it that way on some of the platforms I'm on, they can't see the description. So I usually ask the authors to say things.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So
So my first, oh, go ahead.
with all of my silly gibberish, I'm going to give the floor to you and ask you to describe the works you've done so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first novel is A Fold to Extinction. It is a sci-fi horror novel. It's light on the sci-fi, so anybody who's hesitant to jump into hard sci-fi, it's not very heavy on that. I compare it to Jurassic Park. It's a pretty one-on-one comparison because it covers a similar topic. And it's about a rescue team that's assembled to pull out a research team that was conducting illicit experiments in the South Pacific on an island. Things go terribly wrong, and they find the research team, and the facility has been overrun by prehistoric creatures. I don't want to go too far into how the prehistoric creatures get there because there's that twist that comes in that sci-fi portion of it. So I hope that you go out there and you learn. I'll also say, just to give you guys a little bit of a thrill, if you liked the concept of travel in the book Dune, A Fall to Extinction was a big influence. I pulled that from Dune. So there's a little bit of that element. That's where the sci-fi comes in. It was a love letter to myself as a child. I loved dinosaurs. I loved the military. I was a big fan of a game called Dino Crisis as a kid, and you'll absolutely see a lot of little nods to both Dino Crisis and Jurassic Park throughout it. They're very intentional. Some reviewers have said that it's like a cross between the movie Aliens and Predator, and I can't think of a better acknowledgement to my work to have gotten that review from random people. So very happy to hear about that. Sinner's Pass was my second novel. It is more of a traditional paranormal horror. Fans of the Silent Hill series, either the movie or the novels or the video games, they're going to find something in there they like. It came out from a couple justifications of why I wanted to write that one. Um, I had one reviewer say that a couple of my characters from my first novel were kind of two-dimensional, which is expected in that type of horror. And I wanted to make sure that every character had a very in-depth background. So that's exactly what I did in Sinner's Pass. I made very in-depth characters and backgrounds and storytelling for that, along with I wanted to prove that even though paranormal isn't my preferred type of horror, that I could write it,
Yeah.
which I think I accomplished. And then my flagship series is Alone Together. So right now I have two of the novels out, Alone Together and Alone Together Factions. And it follows the collapse of society after a mysterious pathogen spreads throughout the United States and the rest of the world, turning people into hyper aggressive predators. You can kind of compare it to what would be in the 28 Days Later series because they're not truly undead. They are still living people, and that makes them a little bit more intelligent and more difficult to deal with. It's a multi point of view series, so you get a little bit of the military aspect and you get a little bit of the civilian side of it. So everybody finds somebody they can relate to.
Wow. Now, if I understand correctly, these are living beings, people that have, let's say, been altered into violence. And this is not nowadays pretty common zombie story. This is more a humans that are screwed story. Is that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of old artists that I want to really, make sure that I honor their legacy. And one of them was George A. Romero, and he's probably better known for his zombie movies. But he did create The Crazies, which is a phenomenal movie. And then they did a remake, which, in my opinion, the remake honored everything from it and did a great job remaking it for a modern audience. And in it, they're still people, so they're still able to think and use tools, which is what I wanted to replicate. But then I'm very interested from my work that I did in A Fold to Extinction, talking about evolution and how it's not a immediate jump, it's a march across time. But there's elements in our real world that we can't line up because, the time is a cruel mistress and has removed that evidence. So we are thinking that we understand what happened between Homo sapiens and the Neanderthals, but we're not positive what happened there.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what if we were once all one and something like, let's just say from space, changed an entire segment of the population into something else, and that's why there's a deviation between them. And that's a very real thing that's happening because we've seen it in our DNA that there's viruses in our blood that don't actually do anything, and it's combined into our DNA, but we don't know where it came from, and we think some of it might be from outer space, and that's a really cool concept. So you're going to see a lot of those theories, even though they're not central to the plot, that they're explored and alone together. And I've had a lot of fun doing it. Now, I'll also say it's a very emotionally driven series. So if I'm saying this and you're like, ooh, it sounds like it's going to get into a lot of theories, it doesn't. You're going to focus a lot on the survival of those individuals and the trauma, both pre-pandemic and post-pandemic that they're going through.
Oh, yeah, that sounds wonderful because I'm a firm believer that the key element in any story is the emotion of the story, both the emotions that the characters go through and maybe even a little more important, the emotions the reader take away with them. 2 hours later, 2 days later, 2 weeks later, are they still thinking about how that book made them feel? I think that's every author's goal, or it should be. We don't write stories just to put the words together correctly. We want to move our readers. We want to give them something they didn't get somewhere else. It sounds like Alone Together is a well on track to do that. Have you had, I don't care what your sales are, but pretty good success and feedback on the first two books?
Yeah, I'm gonna say, I'm gonna toot my own horn here a little bit. I guess that's the point of that conversation. But Julie Hutchings, who's also the author of The Harpy and a well-established editor, she came back because she's working with me on book three, and she said, I've never had somebody that I'm working with where I was in the shower and I couldn't stop thinking about what they wrote and the scene that they just finished. And I was like, yeah, there we go. That's what I want to hit on. And I've had a couple of guys that have reached out and they said, I'm previous military or I'm prior law enforcement, and I know exactly how all these characters are thinking. And that means a lot to me because I used a lot of my military experience and a lot of the experiences that I knew my friends had gone through to try and shape the mentality of these characters. And, so often I think authors focus on how the story itself is developing the characters, but those characters need to be lived in and they have to have a world that feels lived in. So I've also had that feedback. They came back and said, this world feels lived in. It feels like these characters existed before the story started. And that's what I wanted. I wanted you to come in and feel like these are normal people getting thrown into these extraordinary circumstances. And now they're going on to this journey that's going to go into multi-books, and we're going to watch how that shapes them as people.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you began writing Alone Together, did you at that time plan to just write a novel, or was it a trilogy right from the start?
So it will be I think I've settled on 12 books that are going to be required to write it. I originally set out thinking that it was only going to be 4 or 5 books. And once I finished book three, because what I did was I wrote book 1 through 3 like back to back. That's why I was able to turn the novels out so quickly. But it's been a project that I've had brewing for a really long time. And I didn't want to jump into it because I knew that it was going to involve so much of my personal emotions and feelings in these characters. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't make a book that's heavy in cliches. And the zombie series is very much a cliche heavy series, like type of genre. I shouldn't say series. Um, so I spent a long time looking at what readers do and don't like in zombie type books. I spent a long time looking at what readers do and don't like in apocalyptic books. And then horror, I spent a long time looking into what readers like and don't like in horror. And I had to try and set what I wanted to write to what was going to be able to hit all these margins I wanted to fall in between. So that's why they're not normal Walking Dead zombies. They're not rotting corpses. I give a justification on why the world is falling apart so quickly, which is often skipped over. But to get back to your other question, like I wanted to write this for such a long time, but it's evolved from what it originally had been to what it is now. There are so many manuscripts that I had written not alone together, but probably helped me shape the way Alone Together came. And those manuscripts will never see the light of day because I didn't know what I was doing. I was far too much of an amateur, which is fine. That's what every writer probably needs to do.
Yeah.
Have a backlog of works that just help them shape themselves. And I finally came together after 2020 when the pandemic hit, and I had my real world experience. I was still in the military. I was a commander at the time period. And you see a lot of that get shaped into Alone Together. In fact, the news reports that Alone Together starts with are stripped right out of 2020. The news headlines, the racial riots that we saw, they are all very much representative inside Alone Together and the experience I had as a commander from that time period. So I think that was the trigger that I knew where I wanted to go, but I needed to have the experience as a writer. So that's why I didn't start with Alone Together. I started with A Fold to Extinction. I needed to make sure that I wrote a military themed thriller properly. And then Sinner's Pass, I needed to be able to prove that I could write a horror, just a straight horror. Gross people out, which I think I've done in a couple people. And then I needed to know I could do a series, and I failed at writing a series before Alone Together, and I never published it. And I think I will come back to that one somewhere down the line, but that gave me an appreciation of what I needed to get into when I plotted out Alone Together. So a lot of factors there to answer that question, but it's been a journey, and I'm really excited about where it's going. And if you're starting to pick favorite characters, all I can say is be very careful because there's not a lot of happiness in real world, and this is very much a reflection of that.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds fascinating. And one thing I really love, it seems like you're intentionally tuning into your characters. And, I'm a pantser. I follow my characters. I don't tell them where to go. I follow them where they go. And one of the best books I've read in recent years was by Molly McCobb. It's called Dark Bloom. And
Yeah.
it is a zombie apocalypse story. I think she's a member of that Dark Veil Society too. But anyway, Dark Bloom has a lot of qualities. But I will say the primary quality that I love in that book, and I'm bringing this up because it's definitely seems to be present in your series, and that is the way that the characters act, their dialogue, the way they deal with the world around them seems so realistic that if I was there, I would probably be trying to do the same thing. I'd be trying to survive. And along the way, it's so strong in emotion. I mean, I can still see scenes in Dark Bloom months after reading it. I can lay back, close my eyes, and watch it. I mean, and the power of the author in getting the emotions to the reader. To me, that's one of the greatest things any of us can do. I'm a writer too. I'm not going to say I'm in that class, but I will say that our goals should be to really move our readers. And it sounds like Alone Together has the technical details, has the world building, has in-depth characters, but it sounds like it really will grab the reader and really get the reader's attention. And I love that. That's what I want to put on my bookshelf. everything you've said about your series is enticing. One thing, I thought it was a trilogy, but no, this actually could be maybe as many as 12 books in the series, right?
Yes.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
so that sounds wonderful because, especially that number, because you're going to come out, I assume, and, you know, storylines and like, you know, three at a time, four times to make the 12. And so
Yes.
you can read one, two, three, and be a very satisfied reader. Come back and read four, five, six. You got a whole nother setup and all new stories, and it's the same characters, perhaps the same setting, but it's completely different stories, right? I mean, you'd almost have to build it as you go over 12 books, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
have never written 12 novels, so I'm asking you, you know.
It's so again, I didn't intend for it to be 12, but I just realized when I was creating the story of the plot, right? When I was plotting it out, um, what needed to happen to drive those characters to certain points. By the time I was at book three, book four, I realized I was nowhere near where I needed to be. Uh, so, which is fine because when you're in that phase of planning, you're you're just trying to make sure that the story is told and it's told properly. And I was like, man, there's a lot more that needs to happen here. And there's also a realistic aspect. I know some authors are very outlandish with, when it comes to anything that's sci-fi or fiction in general.
Mhm,
I need to ground it in a certain level of I can accept this. I have to have that viability into it.
mhm,
So, what happens later in the series, without giving away too much, is the infected don't just stay the same infected throughout the series. They start evolving, and you see this in book one and two in very subtle ways. But
mhm.
by three and four, you realize that there's something drastically different, and they're not truly us anymore, which is going to be pretty critical in the later part of the series as well. So to I had to take a step back and say, this is probably I need to double this up because I hadn't even gotten to this part where the real antagonists are in there. Now, every novel has its own antagonist. And the way I started realizing it, and I did this by accident at first, and now it's intentional, was my prologues are telling you a global story. So every prologue is very important for you to understand what's happening outside of our individual characters. And then the last chapter is setting you up for the next conflict that the characters are going to be getting into. So, book two, there's a very memorable character that was introduced in the last chapter of book one, and there was minor inconveniences that he had created for the characters, but they didn't know he existed yet. Book two, they come on to a head-on collision to him and they don't realize it, but he is connected to something much larger than they expect. And that's going to be very pivotal in book four and book five. So
Oh,
there's that connection that you need to keep. But then there's also, if you pay attention, the prologues don't just exist to give you context. There's another story being told. So book two, you get a little bit of an insight of what the CIA was paying attention to prior to the outbreak. And that's not going to be accidental. We're going to see that those characters in a couple other prologues, there's some politics happening prior to the outbreak, senators and the president and generals having conversations and making little scheming maneuvers and making decisions that way. Those are setting our characters up for the big climactic conflict that happens later in the series. So um, I think that's a very fun way to shape a story. So I'm telling one story, right? Our characters, Dylan, Julie, Roland, we're getting their story. That's what the books are actually about. But the little segments are telling you in a completely different story. And in a way, it's setting you up for a more enjoyable, finalized experience at the end. Because I hate those, I'm going to call out Star Wars, for example. The most recent one, it's like they brought Palpatine back. Like, was it earned? In my opinion, it wasn't earned because the way the first couple movies ended, right? I don't want you to ever feel that way with Blown Together. I want people who fully got invested in it feel like everything was earned and fought for tooth and nail in this universe.
yeah, sounds fantastic. I got to say, I didn't know a whole lot about the stories coming into this show. Just what you've shared, absolutely fascinating. And my time is kind of hard pressed, but I will definitely get into that series. That
Well, I hope you enjoy it.
it
You
sounds
asked me,
fantastic.
yeah, and
Sounds
you asked me about, you thought it was just a trilogy. I do plan on trying to push out 2 books a year. So next year I have Alone Together Hostiles coming out. I'm not going to give you a date just yet because I plan on making a big announcement very shortly with a cover reveal. But you can expect at least one, but I'm going to aim for 2 novels a year. So in about 5 years, you'll have the entire series complete.
wow. Sounds fantastic. Smart to have a good 5-year plan as well. This anything worthwhile is not supposed to be quick and simple. That's why I don't like AI at all, because that's all it offers. It just offers to click a few buttons and get it done. It doesn't tell you that it's creating garbage. I'm not going to go on with that, but yeah, I like hearing an author looking at 5 years ahead, having a real sort of a business plan, and that's important. You gotta have your path. And I salute you for that. Well done. I wanted to ask you real quickly because we're going to run out of time if we're not careful. You're a member, I think Molly is, and I've heard about it a lot on Twitter. What is Dark Veil Society? How would you sum that up to our audience?
Yeah, so Molly is a member, as am I. The Dark Veil Society is a basically just a society of horror authors who've come together so that we can help each other shape our own crafts. So we bounce ideas off each other. We do some alpha and beta reading for each other, and then we help each other on trying to figure out, the market side of it as well.
Wow.
And then obviously we support each other on social media. And there are a couple of collaboration projects that are underway. I don't want to speak out of hand because I don't want to give away what the leaders of the group are booking out there. But if you like one or two of us, you can look forward to finding a single piece that some of us have all contributed to, short story wise, or just, for example, myself and Sean Joste, we're writing a novel as well called A Killer Mind. And we've met through Dark Veil Society, and that's how that collaboration project has happened.
It sounds really cool. Yeah, I didn't know much about it, but you see Dark Veil Society, particularly on Twitter. There's not a day that you don't see that come up. And I was like, that's pretty fascinating because I'm usually not a fan of clubs. You know, growing
Yeah.
up in my life, I'm sort of well, I'm an entrepreneur, so I think my own way. And I'm not really good at being told, you can do this, you can't do that. This is within the limits of our club. This is out of the limits of our club. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'll review any book I want. You don't tell me that,
Yeah.
And so, and then I've heard of other clubs on Twitter, but they get kind of carried away with 1,000 members, and all of a sudden it's just a jumbled mess. Dark Veil Society is actually very selective and got, if I'm not mistaken, about 20 members. Is that right?
Yeah, I can't remember the most recent count because we just introduced somebody new in. But yeah, we're a small club, and really the only requirement is you have to have had at least one horror novel under your belt. So everybody that's currently out there has at least one horror novel selected with them, or a I don't want to say novel because that's misleading, or a collection of short horror stories. So that's really our only requirement. But yeah, we don't enforce rules on what somebody does read or write. I mean, heck, one of our founding members is probably better known for his fantasy series than he is for his horror, and that's perfectly fine. It's really just about helping each other, and especially when it comes to the genre of horror, it's so broad, right? Like a Full to Extinction, somebody could probably justify it as being a military thriller or a thriller in general, or just sci-fi, but it has horror aspects. And I say the same thing about Jurassic Park. If you read the novel, not the movie, the novel, it has horror elements to it, but it's classified as a techno thriller. So it's when you're trying to hit people for a horror aspect, it helps us understand each other's audiences, especially when we're talking about a global audience, not just a uniquely American audience.
Yeah.
What is doing well in the UK is not the same type of horror that's doing well in the United States.
Yeah.
So where do you want your novel to focus on? Or do you have an audience that you didn't realize existed because you're focused on the United States? And you probably are doing better in the UK if you just focused on your advertisements there. So it's things like that. Broaden your horizon a little bit with a little bit more experience. But aside from that, we don't really enforce what each other does or write.
No. So unlike a traditional going back 50 years club, Dark Veil Society is more like-minded horror writers coming together as friends and basically helping each other. Would
Yeah.
that be a good summary?
Yeah. That's probably a much better summary than what I'd given you.
Oh, well, it sounds wonderful, though. I mean, it's nice to learn something about the Dark Veil Society. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
Now, I am
absolutely.
interested. We're running out of time so quick, but I wanted to ask you. I saw on YouTube a show called Birds with Words, which is your YouTube channel, your show. Could you tell us a little bit about what it is and what you see it being in 2026?
Yeah, so I am the host of my podcast, Birds with Words. It's both on YouTube and Substack. It comes out monthly with my newsletter. So if you're not big on YouTube, you can subscribe on my newsletter and have access to it that way just as easily. It's a little bit of everything. And I say that not to try and brush it off, but that's exactly what I want it to be. It's anything I find interesting. So sometimes I'll get on there and I'll read a short story that I wrote. I'll invite another author on to read a part of their short story. I do author interviews, get you to know somebody else. I've done a couple of the Dark Veil Society authors. So if you want a more personalized conversation instead of reading our website, that's another avenue you can go down. And I also do critiques of games and movies. So I recently had the owner of One-Eyed Monsters, who is a video game developer, come on, and we broke down Resident Evil, which was a lot of fun. It's a horror series that we both really enjoy. I have one coming up from the movie Aliens with another Dark Veil Society writer who's also military, and we break down the military tactics from the movie Aliens.
Oh,
And it started as I used to write short stories every month for my blog. And when I started getting really heavy into writing Alone Together, I realized I couldn't keep up writing a short story along with writing Alone Together. So I asked my newsletter readers, and I said, if I did a podcast, which I can knock out in like 30, 45 minutes, and then edit a little bit here and there at each month, would you feel like I'm cheating you by not sharing a short story? And it was overwhelmingly positive. So that's kind of my break even of I can't write as many short stories anymore because I just don't have the bandwidth between a job, being a father, and writing novels that I can at least host a podcast. And the benefit of it is I also get to help out other authors. Um, I do have it coming out just monthly, so you don't get spammed. Same thing with my newsletter. I only do it monthly. I don't ever want everybody to get tired of my emails, right?
yeah.
So you don't get a ton of videos out of me, but you at least get entertaining quality out of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Sounds fantastic. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because of time and ask you on YouTube, down in the description, I'll have all the related links that relate to this show. But I share my videos across all my platform and all the social medias that I'm involved in, and many of them can't see the description. So if you would let our audience know how they could reach out and say hello to you, your website, social media, whatever you want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find my website, which is my home landing page, and it's very simple. It's ssfitzgerald.net. If you go there, you can see a link to each one of my novels. You also have access to my blog. If you click my logo at the very top, it'll take you to my link tree, and my link tree will have my X and or if you want to call it Twitter still, my X account on there, which is where I do most of my social media posting. Not a huge Facebook person, but I do have a Facebook author account. I cross share everything there as well. I'm also on Instagram, and I've recently started doing a little series that used to be called Drunken History of Fitz, where back when I was in the military, I would get home from doing a military maneuver, drink spirits, and tell you a history lesson. I picked that up again on Instagram, but I don't drink anymore. So you still get a history lesson just without the alcohol, but still a little bit of humor in there as well. Uh, and yeah, I would say if you're interested, my newsletter also on Substack, you can find that on my link tree through my website. Again, logo at the top. I don't blow your emails up, and you will also get all the first time reviews of everything that's coming out. So I do have my cover review coming out very soon. You'll be one of the first people to be notified about that. And then I also do book giveaways on exclusively my newsletter. So if you want to try and win a new book from me, next time a release comes out, be there, be able to answer one of the questions I ask, and you can win a new novel.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, we're coming to the end of the time. I use a free version of Zoom. Zoom works wonderfully, very reliable, very good program or platform, but the free version will just go black. When I run out of time, it just goes black. And I want everybody to know I would never just hang up on you, sir. But the program will. So so I'm going to have to go ahead and wrap it up. I want to say though, very fascinating conversation today. A lot of really interesting. I'm going to go back and watch our show several times because, especially Alone Together, the long version series, possibly as many as 12 books. But the thoughts, the ideas, the elements that you spoke of, oh, I could see you filling up 12 books easily. You got a lot of good material there to work with. You got a lot to do, and I'm looking forward to reading it. It's going to be awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and do the show. I have a relatively small show, but I think it's something special. And when an outstanding author is willing to make time in their schedule to come on this little show, that really means a lot to me. And I want you to know I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Rod.
To the audience, S.S. Fitzgerald, Alone Together is available on Amazon. I'll have links down in the description. Let's go out and grab the first book and get started reading. And maybe by the time we read the third, the fourth, or the fifth will be out. And we can keep up with the series. That'd be cool. So, audience, let's go get that first book, Alone Together. And he's got the other two before that. We don't want to forget them either. They both sounded fascinating. I guess the best thing I can suggest is watch his show again because he had so much to bring to this show. Wow, so much wonderful information. Thank you again, sir.
Thank
Ladies
you.
and gentlemen, that brings the Relax and Chat episode 40 to an end. I hope you enjoyed the show and I hope I'll see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.